ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੁੱਜ ਦਿਲ ਹੋਣੇ ਉਹੀ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਹਟਦੇ ਯਾਰ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੈਰ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਪੱਟਦੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਪੁੱਜ ਦਿਲ ਹੋਣੇ ਉਹੀ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਹਟਦੇ ਯਾਰ ਰੱਖ ਕੇ ਕਦੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਪੈਰ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਪੱਟਦੇ ਨਾ ਕੀਤੇ ਯਾਰਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਧੋਖੇ ਯਾਰ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਓਵਰ ਕਲੈਵਰ ਸੀ ਬਣਦੇ ਸ਼ਰੇਆਮ ਠੋਕੇ ਯਾਰ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਓਵਰ ਕਲੈਵਰ ਸੀ ਬਣਦੇ ਸ਼ਰੇਆਮ ਠੋਕੇ ਯਾਰ ਨੇ ਜਿੰਦਰਾ ਦਿਹਾੜੇ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਚਾਰਿਆ ਲੋਕੀ ਪਿੱਠ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਕਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਵਾਰਿਆ ਜਿੰਦਰਾ ਦਿਹਾੜੇ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਚਾਰਿਆ ਲੋਕੀ ਪਿੱਠ ਪਿੱਛੇ ਕਰ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਵਾਰਿਆ ਸਾਰੇ ਹਿੱਕ ਨਾਲ ਰੋਕੇ ਯਾਰ ਨੇ
We're now in the early stages of a sustainability revolution.
The battery problem may be the biggest unsolved problem in all of technology.
Every time the United States has done great transformative things, there's been a partnership between governments and the private sector.
With a willing partner to ensure competitiveness and draw in investment in the United States, Canada's going to be able to be even more ambitious.
The objective for Glasgow, first and foremost, is to keep that 1.5 degree temperature rise within reach.
The train has left the station. Investors care about it. People who work inside of corporate America care about these issues. And certainly we see that with just the broader community.
There's not enough tax in the world for private sector to pay for all of this. It's going to have to be a public-private partnership.
If Russia acts aggressively against us, our partners, our allies, we'll respond. And President Biden has demonstrated that in both word and deed, not for purposes of escalation, not to seek conflict, but to defend our interests.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking after his meeting with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on the sidelines of the Arctic Council. Now, shortly before yesterday's meeting, the U.S. waived sanctions on the company overseeing construction of Nord Stream 2. The Biden administration says stopping the project is a long shot now, that the gas pipeline from Russia to Germany is 90% complete. Joining us now is Bloomberg's reporter Bruce Einhorn. Bruce, what were the key points Blinken raised and the Russians' response of those?
So the Secretary of State brought up issues like imprisoned opposition leader Alexei Navalny, Russia's involvement in Syria, its occupation of parts of Ukraine. That said, he also suggested what the State Department called enhanced cooperation on issues like Afghanistan, the Iran nuclear program, North Korea. And so Lavrov said that we had, quote, constructive talks. There are signs that the two sides may be getting past some of the most contentious issues that they've been facing for a while.
Well, the other major issue of this new administration has been how to tackle Nord Stream, the pipeline, controversial for the Biden administration. Where do we stand right now?
So the Biden administration has essentially taken the same position as the Trump administration, which is that the project undermines European security because it ties European countries more closely to Russia. But in a report to Congress on Wednesday, the State Department said that the pipeline and the chief executive, Matthias Warnig, are engaged in sanctionable activity under U.S. law, but that the administration is going to waive the penalties for national security reasons that avoid the confrontation with German Chancellor Angela Merkel's government. And that's in keeping with Biden's policy of trying to work more closely with allies, despite disagreements, a very different approach than, say, the Trump administration.
Bruce, thank you so much. Bruce Einhorn there, our Bloomberg reporter on U.S. politics.
Valuations, particularly, sort of the technology landscape, have gotten to some pretty extraordinary levels. So I think it's not a surprise. I don't think it's any indication of the beginning of the end, but I do think markets don't like uncertainty.
Good morning from New York. I'm Amory Horder with Manus Cranney live from Dubai. This is Daybreak Europe, and here's what you need to know. Open to talking about tapering at some point. Fed minutes give the market plenty to think about, but stocks have little direction. The crypto yo-yo takes another turn with Bitcoin plunging and rallying 30% in the same day. Kathy Wood tells Bloomberg it can still hit $500,000. And the Biden administration changes tone on Nord Stream 2, saying stopping it is a long shot. The State Department also waived sanctions on its builder. Mattis, good morning to you. 6:30 a.m. in the city of London. I'm physically in New York, but my heart is still in London. And of course, I know 10:30 a.m. in the DIFC. And it's all about the Fed, the central bank to the world. What are they doing? And right now, they are starting to thinking about even having the conversation about tapering. But the question I posed to you, and by the way, I was wrong. It wasn't so much of a snooze fest. But the question I posed to you is, will it change now that we've had that dismal April jobs report?
Absolutely, and a number of voices have said, look, there are still major potholes in the U.S. recovery. Our last guest, Henrietta Pacamont, made it very clear. We're going to be in for what she calls a soft tapering. That will come at the back end of the year, in her view. It's going to be short end dominated. The long end is not badly behaved, and it certainly wasn't an eruption at the long end yesterday on 10-year paper, Anne-Marie. But you know who got their hiking boots on? Fed funds, 22 bips for 2022. So it's a short and soft taper narrative that we're going to deal with.
Yeah, another thing yesterday, too, Mattis, was a 20-year auction that wasn't so hot. J.P. Morgan's chief U.S. economist summed it up, saying it was surprising insofar as Powell, after that meeting in the press conference, said it wasn't time to talking about tapering. And they're talking about tapering. So a little bit different of how Powell presented the meeting than when you see that what the Fed minutes say, a number of Fed officials. We still need to decide who is in that number.
Yeah, and Powell, of course, came out after that April Fed meeting and sort of reaffirmed, you know, we're not there yet. But, of course, we got further ramification if you wanted it. I mean, I would say that the Fed is now heading into dissension and division, because the Atlanta Fed President, Raphael Bostic, he says that it's not time for the central bank to withdraw or begin to withdraw monetary policy support. Let's take a listen.
The data as it comes in, collect as much on-the-ground intelligence as possible, and then make a judgment about where the appropriate stance of policy is. If we see that substantial, significant progress, that I'm advocating that we move our policies tomorrow.
Let's get to Michelle Jamrisco. She joins us now. Michelle, thank you for joining us. So the key takeaways from these minutes, Anne-Marie thought it was going to be a snooze fest. It turned out not so for the short end of the curve. What do you reckon? Do you think JP Morgan have a point? It could be a June conversation to begin talking about tapering?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I know Anne-Marie was really excited to talk about these minutes, but they did give us a line at least to debate and a lot to talk about here. I mean, it's starting from where this isn't surprising, where we shouldn't be so excited. Obviously, the Fed wants to give a lot of advance notice, and they mentioned that again in these minutes, that they of course will give a lot of lead time. They don't want any sort of taper tantrum like we've seen before. Analysts are increasingly betting tapering will happen in early 2022. So that means, yeah, they're going to have to talk about it, start talking about it soon, and then talking about it and going from there. And the Fed, for its part, doesn't want to leave anyone surprised. And even though we don't know exactly how many participants backed this sentiment, the thought that there was some discussion about it, as you mentioned, even before Chair Powell had been so adamant again about not starting those talks, is something of a hawkish signal to the markets. And we do know in recent days, Dallas Fed Chief Robert Kaplan has said, publicly that he wants that discussion to happen sooner than later. He's probably in a minority. Maybe he's one of those two or more that count in that number of participants that started talking about this. But it shouldn't be too surprising that they've brought this up and in a private discussion minutes made that happen. So we'll see how it goes from there.
Yeah, definitely we want to see how it goes from there. One thing Neil Dutta, though, said yesterday was that I always thought was interesting. He said the minutes always give more weight to the hawk, so I guess we'll have to wait and see. But, Michelle, with all that's happened in the past few weeks, do you see any prospects for the Fed to soften its stance on the inflation narrative, on that being transitory?
Yeah, and fittingly, I just have to apologize for the construction noise in the background here. But, yeah, a lot of noise in general on this issue, too. So I would just say that, we'll have to think that they'll largely stick to their guns on this. But I would point to one other headline of the minutes, and that is that they thought that supply shortages could mean higher prices beyond 2021. So, this gets back to what we were talking about yesterday of wanting to hear a definition of what transitory actually means. And maybe they're actually giving into this thought that they're feeling more pressure to underscore that they realize inflation could persist a little longer than some businesses and investors would be comfortable with, that it's not just a beyond the second quarter story, that's not even just a, sometime at the end of year story. So I think the great inflation debate will continue, and the strategy to run the economy a little hot could do more harm than good, and perhaps sway a little bit more, even maybe some more Fed officials to the thought that they need to kind of adjust that timeline. But I will add that yesterday was a tricky day for data on this. We had in hard economic data, we saw Canadian CPI at its highest in almost a decade, but UK CPI bang on expectations, and Eurozone core a little on the lower side. So there's been this debate, even within investors community and within the economist community about when and how this inflation might fade and what should do about it. So the Fed's ability to win the trust of these investors and businesses and consumers is really being put to the test.
Yeah, and in regards to inflation, the longer run inflation expectations, the Fed saw those as being anchored. Michelle, this is the debate now, isn't it? That the Fed could be late, deliberately late. They want to run it hot. And the ECB meets a week before the Fed. So this is going to be the new market narrative, isn't it? Which is Fed behind the ECB, BOE, BOC, and indeed the Nordics as well.
Yeah, and I keep thinking, I wonder, what it will take to kind of calm the markets a little bit about this. That, seemingly so far, some metrics show that investors still believe that the Fed, will act on its transitory nature, and that they will, if they see inflation go meaningfully higher, will start to act to defend that. But, there is still this debate across many sectors. You saw, what caught my eye overnight was a Fannie Mae report showing that, they're seeing higher demand for this summer than they even expected earlier for housing. And that, of course, is one of those areas that's been already running red hot. So, there's different pockets of the economy that might prove to be, talking points for the Fed to have to defend this overall transitory inflation narrative and to really kind of convince people that they're on track with their strategy.
Yeah, Kaplan's been saying that, saying we have real excesses when it comes to the housing market. It's a very good point. Bloomberg's Michelle Jambrisco, thank you so much for joining us today. Let's get a recap now of your First Word News with Annabelle Drewlers. Hey, Annabelle.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. An over 30% plunge in the morning, then an over 30% surge in the afternoon. That was the roller coaster ride Bitcoin took investors on yesterday. The extreme price swings caused outages on major crypto exchanges. The sell-off extended to other digital tokens too, with Ether down about 30% over 2 days. As people return to the office, the UK is rethinking commuter travel. A new flexi season ticket will be available for people who only go into the office 2 or 3 days a week. And in the biggest overhaul since railways were privatised 25 years ago, the government is creating a new public body to better integrate the network, Great British Railways. The US House has backed a commission to probe the insurrection at the US Capitol on January 6th. 35 Republicans broke ranks with their party leadership to support the probe. It now goes to the Senate, where its fate is uncertain. The plan calls for an independent report by the end of the year. The founder of ByteDance, that's the company that owns TikTok, is stepping back from running the firm ahead of its highly anticipated market. Will hand the chief executive role to human resources chief Rubo Lian, his old college roommate. The billionaire entrepreneur is to remain chairman with a focus on longer-term strategy. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg. Manus?
Annabelle Drewlers, thanks so much from Hong Kong. Just ahead, oil is steady near a 3-week low, though, after a market meltdown triggered by fears of rising inflation. The latest on the commodity story coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
Lumber prices across the U.S. are skyrocketing. A 60% surge this year sent prices to a record. And analysts, they aren't expecting any relief until late 2021.
If you can get your hands on it, you're going to buy it, no matter what the number is. And the numbers are getting higher and higher.
Tightness is acute across the entire timber supply chain. Sawmills have had trouble ramping up fast enough to meet demand, while trucking delays and worker shortages at lumber yards have added to the cost. The summer peak of U.S. home building is expected to deepen these supply constraints and keep home prices red high.
What's happening is lumber's going up, insulation's going up, stucco's going up, concrete's going up, and that's getting passed on to the consumer.
According to the National Association of Home Builders, wood costs have already added more than $24,000 to the price of the average new house. Lumber prices are expected to stay elevated for months to come.
What's happening is lumber's going up, insulation's going up, stucco's going up, concrete's going up, and that's getting passed on to the consumer.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
Our team, given the pandemic, has been very agile, and we have always built in plans and strategy in place that's always ready to go anytime whether there's a change in, travel restrictions and where the travel bubble is forming. So overall, I do see travel bubble is an important part of the recovery post-pandemic. And if you see China, for example, it's a travel bubble of its own, and because of that, our hotel business is faring really well. And you look at the U.S. and Mexico, that's a travel bubble. I look at Europe, for example, UK to the rest of Europe will become a travel bubble probably in summer. Okay. Because we try to best estimate where the travel bubbles will be, and then we plan our sales and marketing strategy towards that. The key is to really understand the feeder market. Where would be your imminent feeder market, and really have plans already in place to activate any time that it's ready.
On vaccines, do you have a corporate policy?
We encourage our employees to make their own decisions. Vaccination, to me, does play a very key role to resolving the situation and getting us out of the pandemic. But I guess vaccination is not the only thing. I think we continue to be very vigilant in terms of our health and safety protocol, our personal hygiene, and really stay vigilant in terms of our hotel standards.
What I'm curious is, in terms of long-term strategy, there are not a lot of rosewood properties in the world. Obviously, you take things very meticulously and carefully when you plan new properties. Do you have do you have a rough number in mind, say in 5 years' time, how many rosewood properties you would like? Or do you take things really step by step?
We take things step by step because we are a brand that is Rosewood as a brand is a collection. So we are not a chain hotel where it's about the number of hotels. It's more about really selecting the right location, building really quality properties, building properties that really celebrate the sense of place, and building landmarks.
Rosewood Hotel CEO there, Sonia Chen, speaking to Bloomberg's David Ingles on the post-pandemic recovery. To the oil markets, steadying up today, but still near its lowest price in 3 weeks amid the broad market slump. This comes as the U.S. crude stockpiles saw the largest increase last week since mid-March. Traders are also concerned about the increasing supply from both U.S. and Iran. What jolts the market more? Stephen Stepczynski is our Bloomberg energy reporter. He's in Singapore. Stephen, good to have you with us. So, Iran, we are inching each day with news flow which is more bullish about the Iran deal, JCPOA, the US coming back to it, and sanctions being lifted. Do you think the market is already pricing in Iranian barrels? And if so, what's possible in terms of flow by the end of the year from Iran?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why we're seeing that drop to the 3-week low. That's definitely helping there. Yesterday we had a top European Union officials say that the U.S. and Iran are close to reviving a nuclear deal. And that means that they could quickly begin to ramp up production. But we're not going to get back to that 2.2 million barrels a day that they had before the Trump administration threw some sanctions on the country. An early agreement on some aspect of a nuclear deal between Iran and the U.S. is, it's expected. The market is expecting it, and it will only bring back a partial return of oil exports from that producer. Citigroup is expecting an initial, 500,000 barrels a day increase in exports starting around the middle of the third quarter. No one knows exactly how much Iran is exporting right now. It could be between 700,000 to 1 million barrels a day to countries including China. So that sort of adds quite a bit, 500K, but that's not as much as they could get to, above the 2 million mark.
Right, and we do know that they are ramping up internally to try to get there if the JCPOA does go ahead. Stephen, it's very different right now when you look around the world of what's going on with COVID-19. The third biggest consumer, India, is still dealing with a spiral, really, of the pandemic. While I'm sitting in New York City, and it feels relatively back to normal. So how is the pandemic right now affecting the market as on a whole?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there's really that dichotomy. Like you said, New York and the United States, demand is definitely coming back when you look at where it was just a few months ago, especially as the driving season in the United States is going to be kicking off and people are going to be traveling more because they are vaccinated. Likewise, in China, Chinese demand run rates at refineries are very robust. But like you mentioned, you look at India. Indian demand has dropped because of this historic COVID outbreak that the nation is dealing with. Many areas are under lockdown. Many people are getting infected, and that's affecting demand for oil products. People aren't driving. So Indian Oil has run their run rates, they've reduced their run rates at refineries by about 20% for the second month in a row. That's, lessening the amount of demand that they have there. So that there's this push and pull in the market. You look at China, you look at the United States, and it looks rosy, but then you look at India, and it's a totally different picture.
Well, the other major consideration, Stephen, is the three-stage return of OPEC and OPEC Plus barrels to the market. 600,000 in May, 700 to come in June, and 841 in July. Do you think that pathway to returning those barrels will endure? Do you think that they should reconsider at the June meeting the pathway of return of the barrels?
I mean, I think you just look at prices. I mean, we're at a 3-week low right now. That's true. But before we were $70. That's not even a pre-COVID level. That's the highest in years. So, when you look at the strength of the prices and you look at everything put together, OPEC's going to be looking at the recovery. They're going to be looking at the rollout of vaccines. And really, obviously India is an issue. And, of course, Iran coming back to the market, there's going to be some drama there as well. But overall, prices are strong. The demand outlook appears to be pretty rosy. When India gets through this, it's just going to be even better. So, I think the analysts that we talk to and the traders are expecting, OPEC to follow through with what they put forward. But this is an evolving situation every day, and it could change if there is a big outbreak in another country, if something happens, if there's another variant. So obviously OPEC has to watch it very closely.
Yeah, they certainly do. Thanks so much to Stephen Sapsinski. Also, the only person I know who makes commodity trading fun and interesting on TikTok, Bloomberg's energy reporter in Singapore, joining us there. But just ahead, the crypto yo-yo, we're going to get back to what's going on in that space. Bitcoin losing 31% of its value in the morning, then surging 33% in the afternoon. What happens next? That's coming up. This is Bloomberg. generation's biggest problem.
Climate change is happening.
And the world's most innovative solutions.
Transport, industry, buildings, electricity, all of those things.
Everything you need to know about our changing environment, the politics of global warming.
We can and we will deal with climate change.
In the fight against climate change, Bloomberg Green has you covered.
Every Friday with 30 minutes dedicated to fixed income, I'm Jonathan Ferro. This is Bloomberg Real Yield.
Mercedes-Benz is on a path towards CO2 neutral mobility. So we have flicked the switch there, and really we're going to step by step electrify everything. And what does that mean? Combustion engines get electrified.
We go through soul-searching times like this.
This is, an asset with very weak fundamentals that is going to be subject to a lot of volatility.
I mean, imagine roads with no speed limits, right? I mean, nobody knows if you should drive fast or slow, and so it's super dangerous. And then you have a speed limit, and everybody knows what the rules are, and they can then adjust their behavior. We need that in crypto.
The crypto space is one that's very exciting and interesting to watch. There's a lot of volatility in it. But right now, it's not at a scale, and it doesn't have a reach into the economy that has systemic implications for us.
Our conviction is as high. The one thing that has changed here, however, is the environmental concerns around Bitcoin in particular have caused people like Elon Musk to pull away and say, whoa, 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 let me make sure I understand this. And we believe that even this is going to change.
Crypto assets seeing a whipsaw session yesterday, plunging then gaining 30%. Bitcoin and Ether led losses this week as a result of a stream of bad news. First, Elon Musk complaining about Bitcoin's fossil fuel usage. Then the PBOC added to the negative sentiment by reiterating that digital tokens can't be used for payments. So joining us now to break this all down is Bloomberg's Asia crypto czar, Joanna Ossinger. Joanna, one thing that struck me yesterday was what Mrs. Wood said, and that is the fact that she saw capitulation flashing on her screen. For many, is this a buying opportunity? Do you expect the price to rise out of this?
It does seem like it could be. And of course, Bitcoin went down to almost 30,000 and now it's back up around 40,000. So it does look like capitulation there. But a lot of people were taken out by that. You can say that it's froth, but there were quite a significant number of retail investors who really took it on the chin. And there were all sorts of Twitter posts, everything going around saying, okay, I keep buying on the dip, but then what do you use to buy the next time, right? But definitely for people who had just a small portion in there or might have been saying, oh, geez, I don't want to buy at 65,000, 55,000, this could be a good entry point for somebody longer term who's looking to get in.
Yeah, well, I think we do have to have a health warning, which is obviously Cathie Wood, Elon Musk, etc., all have a vested interest in remaining fully committed to the bid story on this. How much credibility does Cathie Wood have when she says that it's the equity market volatility which is causing an implosion in Bitcoin? That, even for Henrietta Paquemont, who was with us from Wells Fargo, says that's a stretch.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, Cathie Wood is obviously a very smart person. So, but she and her firm are very much into crypto, and not everyone is. So, but it's the sort of thing where people do love the asset class or hate the asset class, and that there are a lot more people getting in. It is becoming more mature. There are more big institutions getting in. So it's definitely somewhere that it wasn't, say, a year or two ago, but it still has this volatility, and especially the smaller coins do. But even Bitcoin, it can go up or down 30% easily in a day, as we just saw.
Absolutely, and I'm suppose just disappointed that I'm not one of those that has exposure to it. Well, I don't know that I've got exposure to it. Joanna, thank you very much. Joanna Ostringer, our Asia crypto czar. Bitcoin bounces by 4% this morning, $39,877.31. Don't forget the 31 cents, Anne-Marie Jourdain. How's New York?
It's still under the 40K mark, though, Manus. So it's going to be interesting how the rest of the session Bitcoin does, especially when U.S. markets start waking up. But that does it for Manus and myself. Manus, of course, off tomorrow. Enjoy your weekend. I'm back, though. This was Daybreak Europe. Anna and Mark up next for the Open. This is Bloomberg.
BSO Now is your online home for weekly Boston Symphony Orchestra and Boston Pops performances. See new concerts that go behind the scenes, plus acclaimed archival concerts. Visit bso.org/now, where the music plays on. BSO season sponsor, Bank of America.
This is a market that over the past few weeks has made it clear it wants to go higher. It got a little spooked by the idea that geopolitical tensions are rising.
Good morning. Welcome to Bloomberg Markets, the European Open. I'm Anna Edwards, live in London. Mark Cudmore, our Markets Live managing editor, joins us in Singapore to take us through all of the market action this hour. The cash trade is just less than an hour away. Here are your top headlines. Open to talking about tapering at some point. Fed minutes give the market plenty to think about, but stocks lack direction. The crypto yo-yo takes another turn with Bitcoin plunging and rallying 30% in the same day. Kathy Woods tells Bloomberg it can still hit $500,000. And the Biden administration changes tone on Nord Stream 2, saying stopping it, is a long shot. The State Department also waived sanctions on its order. Welcome to the European Market Open. It's just gone 7 o'clock here in London. Mark is with us in Singapore. We're through the headlines, Mark. What are the markets saying to you?
Good morning, Anna. Well, it's a little bit of a confused day in markets, but overall it seems like traders are on the back foot of the volatility that we saw yesterday across the crypto space, still reeling from some of the moves. And while Bitcoin has bounced back a long way, many other cryptocurrencies are still down massively from only a few days ago. So that's left volumes in Asia be a little bit lower, a little bit more reluctant, and we don't have a strong direction yet.
Don't have a strong direction yet after all the volatility of yesterday, Mark. We'll be back to that big story in just a moment. Let's just break some news coming through here in London. Just gone 7 o'clock here in London. So we're getting numbers through from UK corporates, and EasyJet is one of those. First half headline pre-tax loss, £701 million. That is a little brighter than the loss that had been anticipated of 717 or 718 million pounds. They're not providing further financial guidance for 2021. They are also giving us some guidance on capacity levels into the third quarter. The first half, they are set to fly around 15% of their 2019 capacity levels, so in Q3. So putting all of that together, you get some sense of just how reduced an operation EasyJet is. We have seen shares bounce back 80% over the past year, regained around half of what they lost in March time 2020 around the pandemic. Everybody knows the story behind this, of course. Let's just to tell you, we're going to be speaking very shortly to the CEO of EasyJet, and we'll discuss these results and some of the other news flow, certainly plenty of it here in the UK. Johan Lundgren will be with us very shortly. Let's just get back to the broader market picture then, because just under an hour away from the start of cash equities trading, we need to check the futures. Given the amount of volatility in many asset classes yesterday, was it all driven by crypto? Was it about inflation fears as well? We add on to the European session, the Fed, and the recovery that we saw late in the day for US stocks, and things look a little divergent across the Atlantic. So this is the picture for European futures to the upside. We do expect to see something of a bounce back, something of a rebound, but not actually making up for the more than 1% that we lost on many of these European markets yesterday. US futures a lot flatter, but we did see a late recovery stateside in equities, even given what we heard from the Fed, adding that in to all of the things we were dealing with earlier on, which was the crypto sell-off and inflation fears. Mark, how does that all add up to something to trade off on the GMM in Asia?
Well, the GMM's giving a similar picture, Anna. This idea that we are seeing a bounce back in some assets, but not recovering the moves that happened before. So I think probably one of the easiest ways to see that is in the equities column. Yesterday, when I went to the GMM page, Australia was top of that column yet again, but for losses. Today, it's top from the Asia session for gains, but it's only gaining back just over half what it lost yesterday. And that's a general theme we're seeing across this region. While dollar weakness has been very prominent in the early part of the week, we've actually seen a little bit of dollar strength today, a little bit of Asian currency weakness, and of course we are seeing still that very mixed commodities picture, but we are seeing a general theme of commodities on the back foot in the last few days. Steel again, industrial metals really suffering from this China, at least rhetorical clampdown on what's happening in the commodity space.
Lots to talk about then. We'll be back to the commodities story shortly. You can see there, as Mark points out, some of the negativity around commodities this morning. Let's get back to the top story we started with this morning around the corporate earnings, and that is from EasyJet. Headline pre-tax loss, £701 million, a little bit brighter than the loss anticipated in the markets. Let's speak to the CEO of EasyJet. Johan Lundgren joins us now. A very good morning to you, Johan. Thanks for spending time with us. You're not providing any further financial guidance for 2021, and there's still a lot of uncertainty. I wonder whether you think or when you think you might be in a place to provide that guidance. Is it possible to say?
Well, first of all, I think it's fair to say that we are definitely now in the phase of recovery. We're seeing that large parts of Europe is now opening up for travel from low-risk countries without any restrictions. So as the vaccination program is being rolled out here, we are definitely now, ready to pick up the demand that we see is going to come across the market. But it's still, to your point, it's still very limited visibility beyond, the Q3 that we are in. We only expect to fly around 15%, as an example, of 2019 capacity in Q3. But the trend is definitely there, and we know that there's a huge pent-up demand for people to travel. So it's all now down to the restrictions being unwinded.
Good morning, Johan. You say you expect to use about 15% of your 2019 capacity. How volatile is that number? I know there's a lot of changing still happening in terms of restrictions or changing by the day. What has been the path of that number over the last couple of months in your mind? And, how much volatility could you expect in the next couple of months in terms of that changing?
Well, it's really down to things like the daily news flow. We see that the booking patterns are reacting extremely fast to the sentiment from the governments when it comes to the restrictions being placed, or as we see now across Europe, many of them are being removed. We are seeing a surge in bookings in those markets where travel is now becoming less restrictions, and in many cases also restriction-free if you're vaccinated. But at the same time, also, there still remains uncertainty, particularly here in the UK, where the UK government is adopting a very different approach than what we're seeing across the UK. And we have about 50% of our business outside UK and 50% of the business in the UK. So, of course, there's volatility around that. But we know one thing for certain, and that is that people can't wait to get on to the travel, to reunite with family members, to go on their business trips, and also to take that hard-earned holiday. So we know that the pent-up demand is really there, and it's growing.
So there's pent-up demand. Let me talk about that 50% of the business in the UK then, Johan, and some of the politics around it. We have this traffic light system, just for international viewers to bring them up to speed, red, amber and green countries. Of the amber countries, the UK Prime Minister said yesterday, these are not somewhere you should go, you should be going on holiday. If I go to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office website for France, for Greece, for many popular holiday destinations, it advises against all but essential travel. Insurance often not valid in some of these countries, and yet you're selling flights to many people who I imagine are going on holiday. Is that responsible at this point?
Well, you should know that many of the countries that we're talking about are low-risk countries, and the latest scientific data supports that you could actually open up travel into those places without any restrictions, that they should be put onto the green list. Now, the government here in the UK are almost dismantling the framework that they set up themselves. And we mean that you can use the data that is available and allow travel to take place to these destinations. And that is exactly what you're seeing now happening in Europe. And that's down to the success of the vaccination program. Of course, there are destinations and there are places around the world where you shouldn't travel. But that was the whole purpose of what this framework was going to do. But now we're in a situation where actually green doesn't mean green, because there's still lots of restrictions in that green category. And you have some cases where now amber is more or less red, because the government are now saying that you shouldn't travel to these places unless you have a necessity to do so. But that is very much up to the individual to do so. So, of course, we will supply and fly where it's legal to do so, and we see that there's a demand. But I also like to point out that EasyJet is the largest operator to the green countries here in the Europe. So, of course, we're seeing that that is an advantage. But we urge the government to look at the latest data that is available, and that states very clearly that you could open up travel to a number of these amber destinations and put them in the green category.
So are you saying, Johan, it's okay for you to offer flights to amber countries because you believe at EasyJet that they should be green?
Well, it's not only we who believe that. First of all, the framework allows you to fly to these countries. But what we're saying is that there's a number of countries within that amber category that should be categorized as green. That's what the latest data tells you, because of the success of the rollout of the vaccination here in the UK and the prevalence of the virus, and also the data that exists on various concerns. We're looking forward to the government to do that. And that is exactly what is now going on in outside the UK in Europe. So we urge the government to look at those examples and look at the data available and make travel available for people to reunite with family members, take that hard-earned holiday and start doing the business travel that we know that people are looking forward to, much to do from company side.
I hope you're right, Johan. When will EasyJet next take delivery of Airbus airplanes, and do you expect to defer any more orders?
Well, we have tremendous flexibility in the arrangement with Airbus, and we're taking no delivery of aircraft for the first time in the company's history here in 21. And then we have a phased schedule when it comes to delivery, but we'll keep, of course, making sure that we can always adapt to the levels of demand that we see in the market. And I think the level of flexibility that we have negotiated is unprecedented, that is out there. And that's going to fit and suits us very well as we're coming into the phase now of recovery, and then later also growth.
Just on the balance sheet, Johan, to finish, do you anticipate having to raise further cash? Is that something that's still on the radar? You wouldn't take it off the table?
Well, since the start of the pandemic, we acted very swiftly. We raised over £5.5 billion of liquidity. We got access to liquidity of 2.9 billion at the end of the half, and we're going to continue to make sure that we review the options that are available for us and make sure that we can, at any point in time, cope with the levels of liquidity that we need. And there's nothing really more to add to that. We're taking the same approach as started this journey, and that's what we can continue to do.
Johan, thanks very much. Great to speak to you. Thanks for joining us. Johan Lundgren, the EasyJet CEO, joining us this morning here on the European Market Open. 11 minutes past 7 here in London. Coming up on the programme, will taper talk soon be on the table at the Fed? We dig into the details of the minutes from the central bank's last meeting. That conversation next. This is Bloomberg.
Right now, about half of U.S. households invest. We'd like to get that number up to 95+%. Investing should be as ubiquitous as shopping online. It should just be something that people do.
It was a surprise to hear the talk about Fed tapering. I think that that is something that is a debate that won't play out over 1 month, but the market had been thinking there might be a couple of months before you really saw this particular issue come into focus.
From a Fed's perspective, keeping the emergency measures in terms of the policy, I think, will be less warranted as the growth comes back. And hence the point that they are thinking about talking about tapering. It's not tapering as yet. I think will come to the front. I don't expect that to be a June FOMC outcome, but something that will happen between July to September.
We're going to continue to see this debate around inflation. You're going to get volatility throughout the summer, and we're going to be guessing about the Fed minutes and the specific meaning of those words for the next several months.
Some reaction there to the Fed's April minutes, which revealed that some officials were open to a debate at upcoming meetings on scaling back bond purchases. Open to the debate then, Mark. And we're talking about a number of participants suggesting it might be appropriate at some point in upcoming meetings to begin discussing a plan for tapering. So there's plenty of caveats there. I guess are we back to wondering how many is a few, how many is a number, to get a sense of just how many on the FOMC share this view?
I think it's more about what stage we are in the process. It sounds like right now they're talking about, thinking about, talking about tapering. So that might mean we're still several meetings away, and it's where we are in that process. I think I completely agree with Susan there, that last speaker in that string, that the idea that, look, it just means we're going to have more volatility ahead. We're at that crunch point where the data is saying that there's kind of upward pressure on markets. The Fed are acknowledging this, But now we're getting a lot of volatility in markets, and we're getting just, growth. The growth surge has ended, even as the inflation surge continues. And this is a particularly tough time and the crucial time for policy. So this volatility is going to continue for the next few months.
So the volatility continues. Let's get another view on what we heard from the Fed yesterday. Sam Linton-Brown, Deputy Head of Global Macro Research and Head of G10 FX Strategy at BNP Paribas, joins us. Sam, good morning to you. How surprised were you to see this early talk of talking about tapering? How surprised were you to see it in this month's set of minutes? Did you think we had another month to go until we got this kind of warning flag?
Good morning, Anna. Thank you for having me on. The hawks are circling, but the doves are still ascendant. Let me make 2 points. The first is on what might a number mean. It could be as few as just 5 to 7 participants. We already heard back in January from 4, Kaplan, Evans, Bostich, and Harker, that they were already wanting to talk about tapering. We also saw from the March FOMC dots that 4 participants expect the Fed to hike rates next year. Both of those 2 data points tell us that there are at least 4 members who already think the Fed should be having this tapering discussion. So the change from what we knew before to a number could be quite marginal, as small as perhaps just 1 or 2 additional members. The second point I'd make is that data that's come since the April meeting makes this information somewhat stale. Yes, we've had an upside surprise to inflation and inflation expectations, but crucially, we had the downside surprise to the jobs numbers. And that's what the Fed cares about most. They've been very clear on that. So information received since the meeting likely skews the committee somewhat more dovish.
Good morning, Sam. I think that's a very good analysis of where the Fed is at. What I'm curious is where you're at. Are you part of the team transitory, or do you think it's going to be sustained inflation?
Thanks for the question, Mark. As our chief global economist likes to say, if you strip out all of the subcomponents which went up, the index has to go down. So clearly I'm being quite flippant here. And yes, we acknowledge there are a number of idiosyncratic transitory factors pushing up inflation right now. But we think what's occurring is more than that. 3 key points here. The first is that we're seeing supply-demand imbalances in the information. The second is that we're seeing higher transitory prints currently feed through to higher expectations. And the third is that central banks are still very dovish. So we think this inflation, this reflation narrative has further to run. With respect to what it means for the market, a lot is already in the price. Nobody can deny that. But we think there's further to run. We recently extended our target on 5-year inflation break-evens in the US higher by about 25 basis points. We think they can go above 270 basis points. And we've also expect there to be feed through to Europe. We think that one-year inflation expectations in Europe can also adjust to the similar magnitude up.
And where does that leave yields? If you talk about inflation expectations there, Sam, but we still think central banks are sounding pretty dovish, and thinking about the Fed here specifically, of course, we're at 1.66 is the handle on the US 10-year right now. We ranged around 1.62 to 1.69, and now we've dropped down a little bit from that 1.69 level yesterday. Where do you see that heading, given what we now know from the Fed?
We think 10-year in the US is going to head to 2% over the coming months. Similarly, in Europe, we think we're in a situation of higher yields, steeper curves, cheaper bonds versus swaps as well, particularly as we head into the ECB meeting in June, where although much is already in the price, we think expectations for the ECB beginning to taper the pace of its PEP purchases will drive a continuation of the recent moves we've seen across Eurozone sovereign markets.
Do you see 2% as the high print, or do you think that, that is where we'll end the year?
We think yields will go beyond 2%. The target we have for the end of this year is 220 basis points. I'd actually argue that a dovish Fed now, and I would interpret the minutes last night as maintaining that persistent dovish asymmetric reaction function that the Fed has, actually enables the terminal value, if you like, for 10-year yields in the US to be a little bit higher, because it reduces the probability of a destabilizing, very sharp rise in 10-year yields, if you like, that hard tapering scenario, which in turn derails risk sentiment, derails the risk environment, and eventually prevents the Fed from normalizing in the way they may have otherwise been able to.
Sam, thanks very much for your thoughts. Thanks for joining us. Sam Linton-Brown, Deputy Head of Global Macro Research and Head of G10 FX Strategy at BNP Paribas. Thanks for spending time with us on the European Market Open. Coming up, the crypto yo-yo. Bitcoin loses 31% of its value in the morning before surging 33% in the afternoon. What's next for the virtual currency and its rivals? We get a take from ARK's Cathie Wood. This is Bloomberg.
Expect clear, concise conversation on Bloomberg Surveillance.
There's no vowels in a digital future.
Come on, John, I just think it works.
It works. Fur and Brutus.
We've beaten this to death.
Watch weekday mornings on Bloomberg Television.
You, at one point, I think back in April, told Dow Jones that it could go to about $500,000. Do you still hold that target? Do you still think that's where we're headed?
We do. I do. Yassine El-Mandra is our crypto analyst, and we go through soul-searching times like this and scrape the models. And yes, our conviction is as high.
ARK Invest CEO Cathie Wood speaking to Bloomberg's Carol Massa, and she still believes, then, Mark, if belief is the right way to describe what she sees in crypto. She still thinks she's still got that very lofty target, if you like, for Bitcoin. I wish. I mean, in fact, we'll play more of that interview later on, and we'll see whether we get any further sort of justification of that, because it's pretty easy to pick a number and decide that Bitcoin might or might not get there.
Yeah, absolutely, Anna. I dare to say that belief was the most appropriate word to use, because ultimately these are all arbitrary numbers. And it's the same on the downside, right? There's no anchor valuation here. So if someone says it's going to go to 10,000, it's equally invalid as someone saying it's going to go to 500,000, or equally valid, whichever way you want to put it. The point is they're all arbitrary levels. There's not an anchor valuation. Now, some people talk about the way, you value it based on assuming that everyone in the world, I'm simplifying here, every company in the world wants to put 10% of all their value into Bitcoin. That is quite a big assumption. It also just assumes a static kind of holdings of valuations of companies, of their treasury holdings, a lack of awareness of what else might go on in the world. But that is also a very, very big leap. Probably the biggest thing to be aware of at the moment is companies are increasingly being dominated by ESG. That's probably one of the biggest themes the last couple of years, along with crypto. And companies will not be allowed to put all their money into an asset which is clearly terrible for the environment. So it might be other cryptos might get there, but Bitcoin definitely won't.
At some point, these two themes have to crash into each other, and maybe that is what we've just been witnessing, Mark. Interesting to hear the Fed's Bostic say that crypto has no systemic implications, and I wonder if we learned a little bit more about the relationship between cryptos yesterday and other assets, because we saw big turmoil in cryptocurrencies, of course, a lot of volatility. Some of that seemed to spill through, but we were worried about other things also, you know, inflation, for example.
I was shocked that we didn't see more spillover, and I think that's a very, very positive sign. So I think this what says is that enough of this is now owned by the retail market. They are unfortunately the ones getting hurt, that it's not actually a systemic risk. It's very bad for the economy. It's not great for the state of happiness of people in the nation, but ultimately it's probably not a systemic risk. This is not bringing down institutions which provide the liquidity for the whole market. But I still think there'll be risk aversion every time we see such volatility like we had yesterday.
Okay, remember you can get up to date with analysis from Mark and his team. MLIV Go is the function to use on your Bloomberg. Plenty to say on cryptos there. Now, coming up on this program, a long shot. That's what the US government calls efforts to stop the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. We'll bring you further details on that. The relationships between Germany and the United States in the spotlight. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
Global markets never sleep, so stay connected with Francine Lacqua in London, Matt Miller in Berlin, and Kaylee Lyons in New York. Perspective on the day ahead. Bloomberg Surveillance, early edition. Weekday mornings on Bloomberg Television.
Trading revenues coming in better than expected. Everything cash, $1.4 trillion of cash. One of the most notable aspects of this report that was stellar.
Welcome back to the European Market Open. Half an hour until the start of the European equity trading session, and we are looking at futures that point to the upside. Bear in mind, though, we lost more than 1% on many of these European equity markets during yesterday's session, so looking to claw back just a little bit of that. Let's talk about something else that's been really on the move of late, Mark, and that is commodity prices, and specifically oil. We've talked a lot about commodities, and I've been drawn to these comments by the PBOC and by others in China talking about being concerned around commodity prices generally, but specifically around oil. There was a lot of news flow on Iran yesterday. There have been a lot of inputs to this conversation on a geopolitical front, as well as the sort of a more usual demand story. 66.92 is where we sit on Brent. Where do you see that heading?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's most amazing is that oil wasn't more talked about yesterday, and that shows how much volatility there was in other assets and in the crypto space. Ultimately, this is one of the world's most important assets. There's more delivered in physical oil markets than there is in all metals markets put together. So it's a really, really important commodity for the world economy. And no matter how ambitious we are on the environmental side, it is still the thing that fuels every way of life all around the world at the moment. So this is such an important asset. Normally any ructions have implications across other assets. So yesterday we fell about 3%, and the general theme at the moment this week is that we've seen large dips whenever we've heard positive potential news on an Iran deal, and this shows that an Iran deal is in price. The extra supply that Iran might bring into the market, potentially moving from 2.4 million barrels a day up to maybe 4 million barrels a day. Iran are kind of paving the way away from the negotiations. They're kind of getting their setup ready to increase supply as soon as they're given the green light. So this could have a big impact on the market. Now, the reason I draw attention is we're right at the top of this kind of 2-year range in Brent crude, up by the $70 a barrel. We haven't actually closed above $70 a barrel in Brent crude since May 2019, nearly 2 years ago. So we're right up there again. Everyone in the oil market is super bullish, as they always seem to be near the highs. I am slightly worried there's downside risk from the Iran deal. The extra complication here is that kind of overlay in that chart, the idea that 10-year yields do have a large correlation with oil, and that's because oil is a big feed through into CPI basket, into inflation. So if oil can close above $70 a barrel, that might be the trigger for 10-year yields to really break through to the top side as well.
Right, so still has that impact on inflation numbers, still has that impact on the wider market, despite all the ESG efforts, of course. Let me ask you about the broader commodity space and your expectations there then, Mark, because we looked at the GMM at the top of the programme, steel under pressure once again, iron ore under pressure once again, and we've had a little bit more detail from Chinese authorities about how they want to maybe increase the pledging to increase supply to some of these markets, more domestic supply. They want more oversight of markets, they want to crack down on speculation and on hoarding. And that does seem to be having a bit of an impact on certainly those companies that operate in that space through the Asian session.
So there's two different time spans here. Absolutely, their kind of aggressive rhetoric is having an impact short term, and it will continue to have an impact. China is by far the world's biggest consumer of commodities. So if they are changing their game, if they're changing their tack, this is massive implications. The fact is, longer term, though, that demand is still there. So while they might have a very powerful short-term impact, and by short-term here, you know, we could be talking weeks or a few months, the fact is, over the next couple of years, they can't replace a lot of that supply they need from elsewhere in the world. And the demand-supply picture is still overall quite bullish for a lot of these metals. I'm not talking about oil here now, I'm more talking about the metal space. So I think that even if China managed to make metals prices sink in the next couple of weeks, the short term, I think over the next couple of years, we're still seeing copper prices go higher.
OK, let's stick with the commodities theme, Mark. And the US has waived sanctions on the company overseeing construction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline from Russia to Germany, saying that stopping the project was, quote, a long shot. The Biden administration announced the decision just before a meeting between Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. The two met on the sidelines of the Arctic Council in Reykjavik. For more on this, joining us now is Bloomberg's reporter Bruce Einhorn. Bruce, good to have you with us then this morning to give us your insights. What were the key points then that Blinken raised, and how have the Russians been responding?
Well, the Secretary of State brought up a lot of the contentious issues between the two countries, including imprisoned opposition leader Alexei Navalny, Russia's involvement in Syria, the occupation of parts of Ukraine. That said, he also called for cooperation in places like Afghanistan, North Korea, Iran. The Russians, for their part, seemed to take it well. Lavrov said that the talks were constructive and said that the two sides needed to get back beyond what he called the unhealthy situation which has existed over the past few years between Russia and the United States.
And Bruce, can you explain to viewers exactly why the Nord Stream pipeline is so controversial and what exactly the Biden administration is expected to do next?
Yeah, President Biden has taken pretty much the same position as the Trump administration, which is that the project undermines European security because it ties the continent more closely to Russia. That said, though, the State Department on Wednesday said that it was going to waive sanctions on both the pipeline itself and the chief executive of the company behind it. This is seen as a gesture to German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Biden doesn't want to get in a fight with her, and instead wants to be cultivating allies in a departure from the approach that, say, the Trump administration took, which was much more go it alone.
Yeah, it was really interesting to see the timing of all of that, avoiding of a diplomatic mess with Germany, that coming just as we saw the US and Russia meeting. Thanks very much for joining us then, Bruce. Bloomberg reporter Bruce Einhorn on the Nord Stream pipeline. Let's get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Here's Laura Wright.
Thanks, Anna. Waymo is said to be talking to outside investors about raising as much as $4 billion in additional capital. The self-driving car company has also discussed plans to eventually list publicly, spinning out from its parent Alphabet. This comes in the wake of a string of recent senior departures, including its CEO, CFO, and others in recent months. Vegan food and drink maker Oatly Group has priced its IPO at the top of a marketed range, raising more than $1.4 billion. The offering underscores plant-based products jump into the mainstream as consumers seek alternatives to traditional meat and dairy products. The listing gives Swedish Oatly a market value of about $10 billion. JP Morgan is set for a bumper payday related to a sale of a stake in Saudi Aramco's oil pipelines. The bank's windfall, said to be $100 million, comes from an interest rate hedging transaction with U.S. investment firm EIG Global Energy Partners. The swap deal was arranged when EIG invested more than $12 billion in the Aramco pipelines. That's the Bloomberg Business Flash. Mark, Anna.
Laura, thank you. Laura Wright here in London. Now, inflation fears are gripping the markets again, but Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic says now is not the time for the Fed to withdraw monetary support.
We've never had an experience with a pandemic. There's not a pandemic response chapter in econ textbooks. So we're going to have to be very nimble in terms of our monitoring of the economy and our policy responses. You know, when I think about where we are right now from an economic perspective, the word that comes to my mind is transitional. Like, we've gone through this pandemic, we've seen the loss of millions of jobs, and now we're transitioning out of a pandemic space into more of a recovery space. As we've gotten that public health challenge under control with vaccines and better management of social distancing and other measures, now we can turn ahead. And so we're actually transitioning out of the depths of a pandemic into a recovery period. And it's just a lot of moving parts that we'll have to keep tabs of. What I will say, though, is that I'm expecting a lot of volatility over the next several months. They're going to see fits and starts. You mentioned that in the last several months, we've had data points that have not met up with expectations. I think that's to be expected. And what that will mean is that we're going to have to do extra work. And at our bank, we do lots of surveys of business leaders and communities. And we also do a lot of outreach to have one-on-one conversations with folks on the front lines to get a better sense of what they're seeing, and more importantly, perhaps, how they're thinking about what their strategies are going to be moving forward.
That was the Atlanta Fed President Raphael Bostic speaking to our colleague Mike McKee there here at Bloomberg. Coming up on the program, we get back to the crypto yo-yo. Bitcoin loses 31% of its value in a morning's trade, but then surges 33% in the afternoon. What's next for the virtual currency, can we say? More on that conversation coming up. This is Bloomberg.
We're now in the early stages of a sustainability revolution.
The battery problem may
be the biggest unsolved problem in all of technology.
Every time the United States has done great transformative things, there has been a partnership between government and the private sector.
With a willing partner to ensure competitiveness and draw in investment in the United States, Canada's going to be able to be even more ambitious.
The objective for Glasgow, first and foremost, is to keep that 1.5 degree temperature rise within reach.
The train has left the station. Investors care about it. People who work inside of corporate America care about these issues. And certainly we see that with just the broader community.
There's not enough tax in the world for private sector to pay for all of this. It's going to have to be a public-private partnership.
I think what we've seen during this period of time is that communicating via video is not a fad. We are using it in all aspects of our lives, for work, for learning, for communicating, for staying in touch.
It's really a reminder, isn't it, just how sensitive the markets are to any commentary about trade. We did see some pressure on the yuan, we did see some pressure on the futures. That is now being reversed.
We go through soul-searching times like this.
I think people in the industry have come to make their peace with the volatility, albeit we've certainly had quite a ride over the last 24 hours.
Imagine roads with no speed limits, right? I mean, nobody knows if you should drive fast or slow, and so it's super dangerous. And then you have a speed limit, and everybody knows what the rules are, and they can then adjust their behavior.
Right now, it's not at a scale, and it doesn't have a reach into the economy that has systemic implications for us.
The comments from China clearly had an impact. I don't know that there was anything new there.
It was actually just a rehashing of an announcement that had also been made in 2017. It's really a non-material event in our view.
Some of the voices there that we've been speaking to yesterday and overnight on Bitcoin's fall and then subsequent rise. It was a roller coaster. Let's get more on that roller coaster ride that we saw in crypto markets. And let's go to Bloomberg's Asia crypto czar, Joanna Ossinger. You've certainly had to work hard for it this week, Joanna. Walk us through then what we saw in yesterday's market, this incredible volatility in an asset that some people say could be a haven to replace gold, but we'll leave that side conversation for another moment. But walk us through what we saw.
Basically, it started to go down, and then there was this really quick drop to almost 30,000 in Bitcoin. And then it did rise pretty quickly back up. But it wasn't just Bitcoin. It was Ether, which fell even more. Ether fell about 44% at its worst. And the entire crypto complex really lost a lot. And you could say it was the comments out of China, you could say it was Elon Musk, but it was probably a combination of those things. Definitely, we know some leverage was taken out. There was some liquidation. And so it does seem like there was some amount of capitulation in there.
Good afternoon, Joanna. We've just in the last few minutes crossed back above this 40,000 level that yesterday people were getting very excited about. I do feel that we get very excited by very arbitrary levels all the time. But where do we go from here?
So that is a pretty important support level because that's right near the 200-day moving average and 40,000, big round number. But it still does feel somewhat fragile. So if the Bitcoin can kind of get its floor under it and keep going, it could base around here. But there also could be a lot more downside. And some people are saying it could even drop below 30,000 and have another washout just because there's still a lot of fragility in there and uncertainty as people figure out what's happening next.
Joanna, when you speak to people in the markets about where crypto should go next, what kind of metrics are they using to give you those numbers? Because we were just hearing from Cathie Wood about her view at ARK that it could go to $500,000. And I just wonder what kind of models people use here. Is it all about technicals? You were just responding there around some technicals. I mean, I was thinking about how on earth you would value this, and it just seems to be something that's driven around by celebrity endorsements and fears of regulation. How do people go about valuing that?
Yeah, well, things like 500,000, 200,000, a million are sort of these long-term estimates that people base on potential demand for Bitcoin from institutions and from a global population, things like that. The technicals tend to be nearer term, so something like the 200-day moving average will be a factor, and the 100 and the 50-day moving averages have been significant at times as well. So those are more kind of near term. JP Morgan does an interesting thing where they also look at the marginal cost of production, and a lot of people will try to value Bitcoin kind of in relation to gold and the volatility of gold or the entire, say, market value of gold. So, and that JP Morgan has looked at, say, a $130,000 level for a long-term target for Bitcoin. So that's several years down the road. But it is really tough. I mean, we have decades and centuries of trying to value things like stocks and bonds, and crypto is just so new. How do you value it? So it's very difficult.
Joanna, thanks very much for joining us. Really good to get your insights. Joanna Ossinger, our Asia crypto czar. Thanks for bringing us your thoughts. And let's stick with this narrative, stick with this story. Despite all that volatility, as I mentioned earlier, ARK Invest's Cathie Wood still thinks Bitcoin will go to $500,000. Addressing environmental concerns, Wood said her team thinks renewable energy sources can be used for Bitcoin mining.
I think what's happening right now is because the stock market, the highly volatile part of the stock market, the innovation-oriented part of the stock market has gone through such a correction, which has been flamed by inflation fears. I think the correlations among volatile assets are going to one right now, and that's including Bitcoin.
So Bitcoin, I mean, you at one point, I think back in April, told Dow Jones that it could go to about $500,000. Do you still hold that target? Do you still think that's where we're headed?
We do. I do. Yassine El-Mandra is our crypto analyst, and we go through soul-searching times like this and scrape the models. And yes, our conviction is as high. The one thing that has changed here, however, is the environmental concerns around Bitcoin in particular have caused people like Elon Musk to pull away and say, whoa, 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 let me make sure I understand this. And we believe that even this is going to change because, first of all, right now, the percentage of Bitcoin mined with renewables and hydroelectric power is quite substantial. I think in China, it's over 50% in renewables. We believe that Bitcoin mining integrated into the distributed grid, and by that I mean solar roofs, power walls in homes, utilities, merchant power producers, starting to include Bitcoin mining in the ecosystem. Why would they do that? They would do it because renewables are intermittent power sources, right? Weather, is it sunny or not? Wind, is it windy or not? And Bitcoin mining could take off if there's excess energy from solar being loaded into power walls. It can be offloaded into Bitcoin mining, and the whole ecosystem, therefore, becomes much more economic.
The views on ESG and Bitcoin keep coming. That was ARK Invest CEO Cathie Wood speaking with Bloomberg's Carol Massa on why she still believes Bitcoin goes higher. Let's get the Bloomberg First Word News right now. For that update, here's Laura Wright.
Thanks, Anna. There are reports that Israel and Hamas are nearing a possible ceasefire. The New York Times says the fighting could stop within 2 days. The Wall Street Journal says potentially tomorrow. It comes amid increasing pressure from the U.S. to de-escalate the conflict. So far, 219 Palestinians have died and 12 Israelis. In the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he's increasingly confident that vaccines are working against all coronavirus variants. It's raising hopes that the last lockdown rules will be lifted as planned next month. The spread of new mutations of the virus had sparked concern that the government would be forced to delay its plans. The U.S. House has backed a commission to probe the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th. 35 Republicans broke ranks with their party leadership to support the probe. It now goes to the Senate, where its fate is uncertain. The plan calls for an independent report by the end of the year. Global news 24 hours a day on air and at Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg. Mark, Anna.
Laura, thank you. Laura Wright here in London. Coming up on the programme, we'll look at your stocks to watch, including Telefonica, after the UK regulator gives the green light to a proposed merger of Virgin and O2. How will the rivals perform then? We will talk about that and get your other stocks that could be on the move this morning. This is Bloomberg.
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
Every Friday with 30 minutes dedicated to fixed income, I'm Jonathan Ferro. This is Bloomberg Real Yield.
Countries that entered this crisis with limited fiscal space, with more vulnerabilities, need to be supported for the benefit of the world.
The transparency of the debt burden for the poorest countries needs to be increased. There needs to be fuller disclosure.
Welcome back to the European Market Open. Some 7 minutes to go until the start of equities trading. Expecting a bounce at the start for European equity markets after yesterday's big sell-off here in Europe that then was followed by some recouping of those losses in the United States. So we play catch-up a little bit. Danny Berger is here with your stocks to watch. And Telefonica, of course, with its O2 business, part of the M&A that we're witnessing in that sector here in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, for all the stocks I'm keeping my eye on this morning, all going to be deal news for you this morning. So yeah, O2 and the Virgin Media merger, proposed merger, the UK CMA saying that can go ahead. Of course, O2 owned by Telefonica, so look for those shares to move and possibly rival BT, seeing that their peers are gaining more market share. In other deal news, we also have STM Micro and Nordic Semi, and its Italian newspaper reporting that STM Micro might be evaluating Nordic Semi. There's also a possibility that they've already sounded out an offer for the company. Now, the final one is Blackstone buying St. Maudwin, their real estate property developer listed in London. It's about 1.5% higher than their close yesterday. It's what they're offering. Earlier this month, though, the biggest investors said that the proposal was too low. It was the same proposal that they've agreed to at this moment. So it'll be interesting to see how this one unfolds. Of course, I know the rest of the team is focused on Blackstone's other investment. That, of course, would be Oatly.